Welcome, everybody, to another episode of me and my friends spending time making art. We're going to continue on our quest to build the series, and tonight it's going to be Brutalism and Worship. We touched on this in the first stream where we kind of started to lay out all of our project, or at least the first three pieces. And then the last stream we covered Addiction, which was the first of the three that we kind of covered. Brutalism and Worship is a big one for me. I'm super excited about this. To be honest with you, when I was thinking about this idea of focusing attention on a cell phone as an object of, well, just as a subject for art and like a string of pieces, I did want one to be that sort of deification of cell phones. And I did have that mental picture of just this sort of giant cell phone thing like that everybody worships. So Brutalism came out of just going through and doing some searching online. I remembered the term brutalist. I just couldn't put it into terms of where I remembered it from. And then when I put together the pieces, it all made sense. And we had brought a mood board to the table in our first stream when we talked about this. And I'm going to bring that mood board right up now. And then I'm going to bring the second mood board because I've got a bunch of things I've adapted as a result of watching the stream again. Something I'm doing for all of these art pieces is I'm going to go back into these streams and I'm going to make videos for each of the pieces. So the first one, Addiction, I put a piece up and I did a video. It's a bit of a lengthy one. So if you've got the patience, go and watch it or throw it on in the background and kind of let it listen kind of podcast style. I just posted one today, which is the one that kind of precedes this build, as I'm calling it. And it's the one that just sort of focuses on the brutalism and worship and the deification of cell phones. So if you want to have a bit of backstory to what you're about to kind of experience, go back, watch that. It's on my YouTube. I just posted it. But part of this was like going through this and making this edit for this video. I started to see some reoccurring themes that we didn't really flesh out in the first sort of run through. And then I realized as a result of this run through, I wanted to kind of solidify some themes that came out that I want to push forward that we didn't really cover in the first stream. So I hope that all makes sense. Hope I didn't ramble too much. Before we sally forth, just a few thank yous. Thank you for everybody who's been coming out and watching these streams. It's been really awesome to have you, and it's cool for those who have gone off and checked out the videos afterwards and the streams afterwards. I have noticed some people have watched them, but thank you so much for that. That is amazing. We'll go through a bunch of things like housekeeping at the end of this, but without further ado, a little coffee and let's go forward. Okay, so I want to start by pulling up the first mood board that we had from the first stream. And I wanted to talk about some of the themes that really stood out to me. Obviously, what we talked about was brutalism. And in my very layman's sort of terms, this idea of stripped down, ominous, foreboding dread was really what I kind of settled on. Okay. Reverence and the need to follow and all that stuff will kind of fall in line. But for now, from a visual standpoint, let's consider the brutalist part of this discussion to be just the visual that I'm looking for with the depiction of the cell phone itself. Okay. Thematically, I think worship and gods, and specifically kind of Roman and Greek gods, those that were immortalized in this kind of incredibly, I don't want to say hyper stylized, but it is hyper stylized. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, but it's incredibly intentional. So with that in mind, I didn't when we went through the stream, and I still to this day don't think that we want to have something staged. Back to that brutalism of just that dread or foreboding. But this was kind of that idea of like, we still want to have that reverence. And we talked about cruelty being a theme. And I think that's something that we should definitely kind of touch on, is the idea of cruelty. We might be able to do cruelty in a harsh way by really pushing hard into this kind of brutalist form. I thought of another theme that we brought up in the stream, which was this idea of like 1984. And for me, we didn't really kind of flesh it out much, but it was this idea of being watched. And again, that like ominous, foreboding, dread, dwarfing. I can't stress it enough. I think those are enough words to describe what we're looking for in terms of that kind of feel. I also noticed that the color scheme that we talked about, we touched on Frank Miller, and we talked about doing very harsh, dark, contrasting colors. I still like the grayscale either way. So if we do the Frank Miller kind of approach that we discussed before, cool. If we stick in grayscale, cool. I think either way, we're still winning. Yeah. Some of the texture notes was this sort of the flat feel. I was looking for something impersonal. Was more my sort of take on that. And we all just sort of wrapped up with this understanding of like, this was the opening approach to the piece. Yeah. I like it, but it's kind of evolved in my mind from watching the stream. And one of the big things that kind of came out of it, which I thought was really cool, was sure, we talked more about brutalism, but we didn't kind of touch on what I wanted. And now we've kind of hit this, but I found imagery for my new mood board that I think was a little bit more honed. Yeah. Because just like the addiction piece, I went back, I sat back, I looked at all the sketching that we did. I looked at the themes, and then I got to watch the streams, which is kind of like watching game film. So I got to kind of go back through my thought process and go, oh, okay, cool. That was what that was. And with that step back in the fresh eyes, I got to kind of reassess what I was starting to see as a possibility with the piece. So, hey, if you can film yourself making art and you can talk to a camera and go back and watch it, it might be something that's worth that bears fruit for you too, because it's been helpful for me in the process, to be honest. I wanted to look at this part right here, this image, and I bring it up in the video, but I liked it a lot because I liked the length of it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I really enjoy how tall and narrow it is. It reminds me of the Flatiron Building. I don't have an image of that handy, so use the Google Monster and find one. It's beautiful. Yeah, you'll notice a lot of these buildings are kind of cutting like a Flatiron Building. It just occurred to me that it's the Flatiron Building that I was kind of obviously seeing in my head. But it's also this idea of I like the perspective. You notice how this kind of layers out to being, something in the front, and then you've got this beautiful layer in the background that's just even bigger, and it's really big. And if you were standing at a different perspective, those towers would be much, much bigger. But it's the way the shot is, so I kind of really enjoyed this. And it got me thinking about if we're going to mount this giant deified cell phone thing, wouldn't it be kind of cool to have something like this as its like stand? And then, cell phone stand, charging stand, this all kind of, really nicely rolls into itself in a kind of very tongue-in-cheek way. So we can kind of play with these things. Something else that came up was like, we go from the circles of hell. We talk about the circles of hell just as a joke about this kind of ring effect that we're getting while we're going through building the mountain where this cell phone stands. For those who don't remember, this was the image we kind of came up with. And we get to a paneled image, and I agree with the paneling, and we get to a story sort of narrative. But for the time being, I kind of want to just touch on what we called our big main image. And this is this thing on this hill that everybody's going to. So with this in mind, if we're going with this idea of having everybody kind of taking different paths up to here, we discussed the idea of the circles of hell, right? But we would obviously be going the other way, right? Because this is kind of how we're doing the tiered cake approach. So on the top is our object of worship, our cell phone. And then these are all the paths that people can take. And I mean, they wind around and disappear. The scale is obviously going to be, the people are like, hey, what's up? Like they're even smaller than that's them. Like that's a person in terms of scale, right? Like they're very, very, very small in what we're looking at because we have to get that that scale up, that big, giant, ridiculous object. If not, what are we doing here? Do you know what I'm saying? So from that standpoint, I think looking at this kind of thing works really well for what we're talking about. You know what I mean? That sort of this is what the giant object will stand on, right? But you get the idea here. But going back to this idea of the circles of hell, something else that came up was this idea of like pyramids kept coming up. Just the shape of a pyramid. Because if you kind of think about it, the circles of hell are just basically like this form, just upside down, right? It just funnels the other way. So I kind of thought about that, and I was like, well, this is an interesting thing that keeps coming up. And one of the things I really liked was the idea of it wasn't a prototypical pyramid that I envisioned as a result of the sketching, especially since it was very mountain. Was like this kind of pyramid, the more Aztec, Incan sort of approach. I'm not gonna say things because I'm gonna say things that are gonna sound stupid. But you get what I'm saying. It's not the Egyptian pyramid, that hard line, triangular, sharp tip. It was more this kind of thing. And for some strange reason, sacrifice came to mind. So altars started to come to mind. So I was like, maybe we could tie this pyramid-like altar, sacrificial altar sort of feel to our, sort of mountainish pyramid kind of approach. And then the rest of it was like these two sort of ideas that I conflicted with was the idea of like something to worship and the depiction of that. And the one thing that kind of stood out was obviously this image, this idea of just this thing that towers over everything, which I felt was really important for our image. And then how do we depict it? And this was something that started to kind of come up. Excuse me, I'm going to clean my eye. For some reason, I have an itch. But something that kept coming up was the idea of like, okay, so we've got a cell phone, yeah? And we stick it on the top of a hill. All right, so what else? So I was kind of thinking about it like in terms of if I were a religion, how would I sell this? And I'm going, okay, well, we might need like a talisman or some sort of thing, a knickknack or some object to worship. So I kind of started looking at like gods and the depiction of gods beyond the Christ crucifixion image, which is indelible. I didn't think that was the right answer. So I was looking at this kind of thing, Eastern gods, statues, that sort of thing. And please, for all those people if I'm showcasing an image of a god or something of a religious object that is important to you, I am not meaning to disrespect you. This was just kind of the idea that I was thinking of when trying to depict like what language I'm going to use, if that makes sense. So no offense meant. And if I did offend you, please let me know and I will apologize in whatever way I am able. I will continue now. So some of the things I kind of looked at was this idea of like, all right, so what's this statued sort of version of our God going to look like? And what kind of inspirations can we pull? So in my spirit of mood boarding, which I really seem to enjoy quite a bit, I then went a little bit further and started to try to find physical depictions of gods, whatever they may be. And I went to, obvious places. I got some Jesus in here. I got some Aztec in here, some Zeus. Again, it's this, as much as this pains me to say, nothing here helps other than insofar as like removing possibilities. Because as much as this pains me to say, I don't think we can like make the cell phone into Zeus. I think that's a bit too cartoony. Like you borderline on like a chair-faced Chippendale thing where it's like it's just a dude who's all buffed with a cell phone for a head. And that's goofy. And I don't think that's what we're looking for. And I also don't want to like show insult to any objects of focus for any religions or belief systems that have actual substance, because then this kind of detracts entirely from what we're saying here, right? So I'm thinking more of like a Kevin Smith like movies thing with a little less plushy. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of more my answer. But this was some of the places that I went immediately to make it like serious. And we're making serious statements. You're inclined to go serious, but there's also the other end of the spectrum. Satire is satire. We can still be satirical and get the point across. So maybe that's the right answer. So here are some of the answers that I kind of came up with when trying to find a more serious tone to what we were attempting, right? I wrote a fun little thing here just because it made me feel like I was smart and like, right? But that was kind of the idea behind this mood board was, all right, let's figure out if we're going to make this thing, what's it going to look like and how we're going to like anchor it. And going back to the original mood board and that idea of like not wanting to create a sort of stage statued depiction of worship for the cell phone with like humans in there. I still think that that's like the right way not to go, if that makes sense. Like avoiding that path is the better part of valor. I think we're better off doing satire than we are trying to make that seem like it's not overly serious satire, right? I'm not advocating for like Family Guy or, South Park. I'm just saying, I think in this case, we might want to be a little bit more satire. And Kevin Smith, I think, is a good answer for that. That kind of like right on the nose satire with just a little bit more of the edge to it. All right. And then I kind of get back into this just using the same sort of imagery and just sort of getting a little bit of a better shot here so that we can look at it deeper. And a large amount of what I found in terms of this research, and by research, I mean looking at images of physical depictions of gods, a large amount of them kind of share the same qualities. They're large. They're almost deadpan, like in expression, even when doing some sort of like hero pose or being involved in something. There's a lack of expression, except for these bad boys who are just always just like, I'm all up in your business. No, I'm kidding. Entirely different, like very expressive faces, very expressive eyes, very expressive emotions. But all the others just kind of seem to be there, right? Even some of the Christ depictions, like his crucifixion, he seems like just way too passive. He's just like, this sucks. And I couldn't put a face on our cell phone god. Do you know what I mean? Like so this all started to kind of push away from where I thought we could go. But I also did think we needed to kind of humanize or make it into something physical, like a plushie without the plushie. I know, tough. And then there are some themes, like I said, that came out of that stream and what we were going through. So I made a big ass infographic because I thought it'd be fun. Plus, I got to use my emojis. So things that I saw in the stream that I think we want to kind of tackle in our piece, right? Size and scope, like we just touched on. And this is kind of helped by the brutalist theme. We need something that's foreboding, that deserves reverence, because if not, what's the fucking point, right? I used fear as a thought process. I think fear is a good pressure point for all human beings, and certainly this is an easy thing to kind of depict. The question is leaning into it too much, and how do you depict that in a way that is satirically safe? So we might have to look at the emotions that we're depicting on our characters that are in the scenes. Remember, we're doing a paneled piece, so that means we have multiple small frames that we get to fill with a whole bunch of information. We also have to remember that, based on what we discussed, we're only aiming for one page. Okay, this is going to be a piece. So conceptually, it's a blown up poster size large piece of art. But it's a singular page of a narrative comic book style. So if we're going to be telling a story, it's all getting done in one shot, because we're not going to be able to turn the page, right? Back to fear, we can use these panels to sort of throw a little bit more information and exposition in a safe way, but we're going to have to do it in a pretty effective one. Make sense? Pacification was another theme that I thought of that was going to be important that we did. How are we going to showcase this need or this willingness to worship? Like, how are we going to do that in a safe way and in a way that kind of works and makes sense? So this is certainly something that we're going to want to make abundantly clear. What the conditions of submission might be. How are we showcasing that submission? And what is it about that makes the entire group very happy to do it? So, we have to appreciate that there's got to be a reason. Apathy is something that I find to be a very important discussion point for anything like this. I think I would assume that you would have to be pretty apathetic to accept this kind of submission, right? So, to cast off, because again, talking about themes, we covered this. We want to show people giving up their current faculties or things that make them comfortable and happy in terms of their comfort zone. I just saw the chat all of a sudden, and I'm trying to read that and say things, and I'm silly in trying to do that. Yep. Oh, cool. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that kind of supplication and that kind of sort of allowance or giving away of your own sort of agency, to me, I think would require some apathy, because I think at that point in time, you might be looking left and looking right and going, I don't have any other choice, right? So we're back to that, to the level in which we're expecting. This is huge. And then the big one I had was the problem of evil. And I'm not bringing up the philosophical discussion of the problem of evil from a moral standpoint. We're talking about the problem of evil in terms of are we depicting this as an evil thing? And I think to a degree, I would have to argue that this isn't exactly evil. You're probably asking, why do you think that? Well, is it really evil? Is it really, really evil when the individuals are choosing to do something? It's a hot take. I know you guys can rake me over the coals, but in this case, people are giving up their things and going a certain way. We choose that. That's choice. That's agency. since we're talking about worship and we're talking about, supplication and giving up and kind of allowing yourself to be taken, we allow this to be a central part of every religious narrative, right? I mean, am I wrong in this? Maybe I am. I don't know every religion that is in existence and in practice today. But from my knowledge, when it comes to the more, I'm not going to say common, but maybe common's the best way to look at it. The most known of the monotheistic religions, a large amount of this is just like total reverence and certainly total submission to your deity and whatever rules therein you have to kind of work in. So this happens all the time. In this case, are we like, do we have to make this evil? Something to think about. I don't, it's not something that has to be bashed into the top of this, as I think we're discovering, especially with looking at what we've gone through with the addiction piece. And you're going to see this a lot now, guys, with this stream and with our process. There is no rush here. I'm going to work this until it's done, and we're going to work it together until it's completed. So these streams will go for 2 hours. They'll go for an hour. They'll go for 45 minutes. We're going to flesh things out, and then we're going to come back to it, and we're just going to keep kind of working through it together. Tonight's going to be a lot of theoretical discussion because I think this piece is starting to evolve into something that is very, very big. And I am very, very, very excited about it. Because you got to think about it, right? Like, here, let's take a pause for the cause, and let's look at what we're discussing and why I'm kind of starting to get a little bit more jazzed for this, but I'm also kind of like pulling back and slowing down, right? Okay. Let's pull up a canvas and let's just talk this out, right? Okay. So when we were talking in the original stream and laying out our panels, we had a kind of really loose structure. I'm going to kind of recreate that structure now, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to try to make it work. So, okay, we said that we wanted to have panels, and we kind of drew out these panels like this, right? Let's do that for now. All right, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this, because we wanted that as our last image, was this sort of quad. Okay, so let's conceptually look at what we're looking at here. We've got this paneled piece. Yeah? Okay. Now, unlike maybe in the past when you didn't have this technology, each panel was being done by hand, and you didn't have the zoomy, and you can only do as much detail as your brain and your finger would allow. Now we're in a place where I can take this panel right here that we're looking at on the screen, the one right here, and I can go to a canvas, and that canvas is that panel. Okay? And I think that's what we're going to end up doing. So we have to conceptually think about this. We're making now how many pieces? Right? We're doing 8, 9, 10. Like that's a candy bar. That's a good amount of work. I don't have a problem with this, but we're going to lay this out, and it's going to take a bit of time. So what I want us to get to tonight is get down the style, the themes, and realistically what we're trying to say here. Once we've got past that part, then we can start designing out the panels and get like a storyboard done. So what we'll do is, like, tonight we'll kind of get the style in our brains, and then what we'll do is we'll pump into the structure of things and how it's going to work. Okay, just give me 1 second. I feel like I'm sketchy. Am I sketchy? Let me see. I feel like I'm a little sketchy. If I'm a bit laggy, I apologize. I'll have to double check to see what's going on in my world here. Let's see if I can dump some programs. Anyway, so back to our sketching. So things that we want to talk about. One, what is our image going to be? Now, we did touch on the idea that we wanted to have that last image or one of the images be this sort of kind of cell phone worship space on the top of a mountain. Okay. And whatever that cell phone sort of um, looks like, you know what I mean? But we're assuming we've got some sort of way for these worshipers to pilgrimage up. I use the word pilgrimage in like the stream and I loved it. So I think pilgrimage is the right answer. So we're looking for that pilgrimage concept. I remember the scale. This is much, much bigger than I'm kind of letting it out to be. But this is the idea here is that we've got this, you know, this giant cell phone in the sky floating and sort of where everybody's pilgrimaging to. We also talked about the idea of having our mountain sort of work. Yeah, I used the idea of like a janky tiered cake, but I like that idea of this, right? We talked about pyramids just now. We talked about that sort of sacrifice like structure. So I want us to kind of think about these things when we're looking at how we're setting up all of our pieces to the puzzle, right? So if we're looking at something like this and we're saying this is the, this is our sacrifice element. And that's the idea. We're at the top of this thing. All these people are working their way up. We can add in there circles of hell. Don't worry, I can read this, right? And it doesn't have to, again, this isn't going to be like right on the nose unless we really want it to be. And if we really want it to be, then we're dipping deep into, starting to hide in little Easter egg like creatures. And that's when we can start to look at this paneled structure and be very, very smart with scale to in terms of the size of the piece itself. I mean, we're looking at it. I'm looking at this. Maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. And this is why it's really important to kind of look at this and say, like, we've got a lot of planning to do, right? Because we could make this entire piece, right? The big mountain scene, right? With all the little people working their way up, right? Super small, little ant-like creatures all coming up. And that's our big shot. And it's like the entire canvas, right? And then we can add in panels, right, that are telling story and still have all the space in the world because the scale of the actual piece is so fucking massive that we're able to like go slunk, 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 slunk. I think that would be the smarter way to look at this. Do you know what I'm saying? So now what I think we got to do is go, okay, if this is what we're doing, then maybe what we need to do is we need to kind of look at features and facets of this overall image and what are we going to put into these panels? Do you know what I'm saying? And what are those panels going to be doing and telling about the story that we're telling here? I still think we go back into doing little myopic details. We talked about the turnstile entrance idea. One of the really fun ones that came up was theme park, right? So this sort of theme park feel. So like the entrance to getting toward this worship space or to this monument would be through a turnstile. And we talked about using the fluff metrics and the you have to be this tall to get on the ride sort of feel. So I think that turnstile idea is something that we can definitely work with in one of those panels. And, like, how you've got the, how you've got like metal detectors when you're going in, we can do that. Like at the entrance, we can do again, when they're shedding their religious ideals. And we can do that by showing, like, here's my cross, here's my yarmulke, but we can go deeper and do like brands, like dropping your different pieces of tech or different things that would identify you as being an individual, right? So part of this is like shedding individuality. Right? The cell phone is your individuality. You no longer require individuality. So I think that's something that we really, really want to touch on and we want to showcase, because if we don't do that, yeah, like I think we're missing an opportunity. And if this is the approach, and I think, like I said, as we get deeper into this, it starts to evolve and starts to hone into a really smart idea. And I think that, oh, all right, I might, a lot of people might not know this, so you might want to look it up. And I don't actually know the artist's name, so I'm kind of screwing myself here. But there's a piece of art that is attached to the Lord of the Rings. It's a beautiful piece of art. I want to say it's, oh my God, it's like it almost feels like a pencil and a pen and ink sort of piece, but it depicts Bilbo and Gandalf, and it's got a framing, and inside the framing are, orcs and goblins, and it's a beautiful piece. And it's got a shit ton of work going on all in these different spaces. I think we might want to kind of take that approach. And maybe not so much like right on the nose of doing the framing with all of the stuff happening in the storytelling. However, we might want to actually do that, because think about it, right? We're doing these sort of little nods to religious practices while we're saying you have to shed your religious identities as you adopt your new religion, which is the cell phone religion, or just the cell phone itself. Yeah. So, like, what about like a kind of breakdown of like the Stations of the Cross? But instead of the Stations of the Cross as we know them, or for those who don't know them, I'm not going to do that. Just look them up. It's a Catholic Christian thing. Just look it up. Instead of doing that, why are we not showcasing like the steps toward salvation? And part of that salvation would be things like shedding your current worldly pursuits to go through the great turnstile as a step towards salvation. But in order to cross that threshold, you need to, give up certain things, right? So, like, that could be a great way to sort of tell our story. Still have our big image in the middle, but then have a little bit more of an anchor in our brains to what we're trying to do with each of these little like sub images. And like I said, each of these sub images are, a cornucopia of opportunity for us to throw sneaky things in that further our discussion. Remember, this is a gallery piece, right? So you got to think, guys. We're hanging this in a room. We're letting people walk up to it and stare at it like this, or from afar, or whatever they want to do. So we have to kind of express this in a different way. This isn't a digital piece of art. Sure, we're creating it using a digital format, but it's going to be shown in a room. So I don't want us to ever forget that that's what the end result's going to be, because the way in which we start telling the story becomes a little bit different, right? If we're looking at this like a page in a comic book, then the formatting is going to be different than if it's like a individual singular image that happens to have that narrative structure, at least in a visual storytelling sense. Does that make sense? It's no different than it is for the addiction piece. And any piece that we're discussing in building the series, because again, this is all in the service of a gallery show. So we want this all to be gallery work. Okay. All right, so back to our structures, okay? So if we're looking at it from like that, even that Lord of the Rings poster style of sort of storytelling slash Stations of the Cross, we still have to kind of look at what that looks like in terms of a layout, right? So let's throw another layer on here. Let's do the evil red thing. I know I'm bad with my layers, but we're gonna do it anyway. So we've got our central image. We know this now. So maybe now what we have to do is we go, okay, I'm going to go and say this is the part of the image that I'm definitely going to see. And I think we talked about this before. We're still going to do the rest of the fucking image. We're just going to maybe obstruct it. Now, if we're using the Lord of the Rings poster archetype, I would probably assume to say that, like, if you had to break down the areas where there was art happening, it kind of, if memory serves, beyond the central image, by the way, which the central image itself, it almost stained glass. It was beautiful. Fuck, it's genius work. I don't think we're going to do as detailed as that one. I think what we'll probably end up doing is sort of this, which is we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4, 5, 6, something to that effect, with this being the, I'm going to say the superhero image, but you kind of get the idea. Right? So I think that's kind of what we're looking at, right? If memory serves, the Lord of the Rings piece was very much like each section sort of showcased a different element from the story, whether it be an area, a person, a theme, or, all in one. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to tell a bit of a story by using each of these spaces to tell that story. Now, unlike the Lord of the Rings piece, these spaces will not be like sneaky frame pieces where there's going to be detail. No, these are just going to be frames in an image, right? So we'll border them in a more sort of design structure. So it'll be like, that's a frame. That's a frame. And everything will be framed out. Now, will there be spaces between here? Who knows? We'll look at it. You know what I mean? We'll look at it. This is one way to approach what we're talking about. Having that big image in the middle and then utilizing these panels to go this way. Now, thematically, like we talked about, we can do Stations of the Cross. You can do steps on a map, whatever we choose to do in terms of those panels. We just want to kind of look at the layout right now and be like, okay, this is what we want. So this is one way to go. We'll call it the Lord of the Rings fucking 1. Okay. All right. That's 1. Okay. All right. So that's 1. We can do it kind of like what we're showing here. So now what we're doing is, rather than looking at it from that like staged out poster like creature, now what we're going to go is okay, I've got a superhero image and maybe I've got story panel here. Then I got maybe story panel here. And then maybe I've got like a longer story panel here. And then a story panel here. And you see where I'm kind of going with this? We can just litter story panels everywhere. It's still going to kind of have the same structure of sort of spiraling around this piece, starting at like one point here and ending at the sort of here, and then just cascading from here to here to here to here. And they're all going to do that. Why? Because we've got a central piece that we're looking at right there. As long as that's the way we're conceptualizing the piece, this is kind of how it's all going to work out, because we're moving it right in the middle. Right now, if we were to go back to that more classic comic book thing, sure, maybe this central figure is one of the panels, But like I said, I think we're missing an opportunity to like not showcase a really cool, amazing image while still telling more stories. In other words, I think it would be a missed opportunity. Okay. But I mean, we can always look at this as an option because we did, right? So let's do that. Let's do ourselves the courtesy of following through. Okay. So, like, and then we've got this answer, which we sort of lined up earlier. And we'll kind of try to stick to what it looked like, I believe, in the original stream. So we'll do that. The hero image will move into the middle here, and then we're back down to the 4 panels in the bottom, right? And imagine like all these are the same size. Please, I'm freehanding it, and I'm not measuring. You know what I mean? So from that standpoint, so this is the like one way we can do it, and we can make sure that each of these panels are like tight to each other, so that there's a lot less space, and we're just taking as much opportunity as much as we can. And dudes, this doesn't have to be this layout; it can be whatever we end up sort of trying to do. So if it takes more boxes to tell a story, we put more boxes. If it takes less, it takes less. Like, but you get the idea, right? Mm. And in classic comic book style, we're still going to start here, right? Moving our way through. And yes, I've noticed that, each of our kind of breakdowns have had different amounts of panels. Again, I don't know how many panels we're going to need. Cool. So I think those are I'm sure we could keep going at this until our heads pop off, but I think this is probably good enough for us to kind of settle to. So, things we got to think about. Do we do Lord of the Rings style poster magic? Right? Let's make my head really small. Let's make this big. Okay, so we take this approach where we've got the big superhero image, again, that image being the cell phone on the mountain. Okay. So do we take this as that Lord of the Rings poster style where we've got each of the panels on the outer area framing the inner image, telling a different part of the story, right? And maybe I'm not, maybe I can relent a little bit and say maybe we do it more stylistically, Lord of the Rings style. I just think we have to stick within these kinds of geometric borders. Okay. But again, I might change my mind. Who knows? That's what artists do. The other answer we had was this kind of more drop panel around that central image, still telling the story in the classic comic book sort of sequencing from left to bottom right as the end point. But rather than swooping across in that kind of way, we would have to sort of spiral around the central image. So sort of starting like a clock in this area here. That's not how you do it here. So kind of like a clock starting like here as one and going all the way around and ending here as whatever the number is, and still not compromising that centralized figure in the middle. Do you know what I mean? So this one kind of allows us to be a little bit more freeform, but then there's the other end of the spectrum where that kind of freedom can then start to make images need to be manifested rather than you finding the image just organically through the storytelling and what you're trying to find, right? I don't like to have to force the issue. I would like to be able to maintain the freedom of being able to choose where to go without having to be forced into filling that space. I mean, granted, we could just make the box bigger, which, that's an easy way to deal with these kinds of problems, but you know what I'm saying? So that's option 2. And then the third option, which is, I think, the least desirable, but the one that we kind of originally came to as an option, was this very singular panel comic book kind of feel to it, with the hero image being, and I gotta make sure I'm on the layer, and with the hero image being this right here, is that sort of central So getting us from, point A to point Z or Z, and how we kind of work that through is again classic comic book style, where we go like bing, 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 right? And that's going to be the way in which we travel our narrative. So these are the three ways we can tell the story. I think we understand what we're looking for in terms of that central image. Where we have to now kind of start to hone our design sensibility is into the areas of like, how are we going to showcase this? And that's where we're starting to ask, like, we start to build a visual language. And for me right now, and I, this is where we're going to kind of go backwards to hit our theme, is that's where this brutalist sort of architecture starts to become, it comes to the forefront of what we're talking about. And that's where we're like going, okay, where we need to go is showcasing this cell phone, right? That's going to be the key to it. So where I think we have to go for our next stream, and where we got to kind of start to prepare for, is the idea of what does our God look like, and how are we going to showcase this? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to start to run with it. So in the interim, I'm going to sort of answer two big questions. And we'll go back to the pad to sort of have these questions up there. And I'll do my due diligence not to just, sketchily write stuff. Okay. Okay. So big two questions that have to be answered so that we can kind of thunder forward, right? Okay. One. I'm going to do this slowly so it doesn't look like shit. Okay. So, one, what does our God look like? Right? I'm not suggesting, like I said earlier, I'm not suggesting that we take like Zeus's body and stick a cell phone on his head. I think that's silly. I think that anything that would like kind of even slightly look like a object that exists today that is being worshipped, I think would be insulting, and I don't think we need to do it. I think we can again Kevin Smith it and kind of think of like that movie's less plushy idea. So I'll just make the note of, I'm gonna write Kevin Smith. It's Kevin. I didn't realize that I wrote two. You know what I'm saying. So it's Kevin Smith. I think we understand what we're saying in terms of that. So that's the kind of depiction we're looking for. Okay. So like one, what does our God look like? And that's a big one I think we need to do. And number two, and this one's a big one too, is like what's the shrine look like? Right? I think these are two big questions. And they're big questions because the other stuff that we had to worry about, the visual language, the story we're telling, like think about it, right? We understand that what we're going to do is we're going to use the form and shape of a sacrificial pyramid, Aztec or Mayan or South American would probably be a safe thing to state, I believe, not a Egyptian pyramid. And we're going to use that form to build out our mountain. Okay, so we know that. We know that we're going to also have some nice little like Easter egg references to the circles of hell as our platforms toward the top. We can add in little visual cues on the paths, we're going to really, really enjoy making out this sort of big hero image, right? Um, we also know that we do want to touch on a lot of these kinds of religious themes. So having these things kind of popping up in the structure of the design, I think we're candy bars and we know this. We also know that we want to play with some theme park ideas. This will help us with our corporate capitalism. And we also want to start to showcase the idea of having to shed our current status to make room for one that we're taking on. And by that, I mean status. Maybe status is wrong, but we can't limit it to just religion. Anything that can be construed as being something that people worship, we have to see them giving it up in order to take on this new thing. And that thing, of course, is, worship of the cell phone. The loss of agency, the loss of sovereignty, and that being done by choice is, again, another big part of what we're trying to do here. So we kind of want to depict that through images, and that will lend itself quite well to at least one or two of these approaches. We have to settle on one of these ideas, as we've just discussed. And, I'm going to be honest with you. By the time we come back to this, we're going to have an answer. But I'm imagining that what we'll do is we're going to end up sort of hitting, this as our format, is that Lord of the Rings approach. But what I'll do is I will, I'll put it out to the community and see what kind of approach you guys think is best. I'll take shots of each of these things, throw them up on all my socials, see which one you think might be best. Now, if no one responds, which is totally fine, I'll just pick one and we'll go from there, which is fine. But if anybody does happen to jump in there, just let us know what you think and why. If you have an answer. If you don't have an answer, just want to let us know what you think. Just pick one. And that brutalism is going to be a key factor in showcasing, the shrine itself, right? And understanding that theme. And utilizing, again, a large amount of these kinds of Easter eggs and these touchstones along the way to sort of, again, have these sort of moments of supplication and submission, which I think is heavy themes that we should really be doing as a result of what we're discussing. Yeah. This is really nice steps towards realizing a nice end goal. So some things I wanted to touch on before we ended today. So a few things. One, thank you so much for bearing with my changes in schedule this week. On Wednesday, I really just wasn't feeling 100%. My mind wasn't there and I really wasn't into it. So I felt like going ahead on that would have been rough. And then yesterday, I had planned to do this, but didn't realize that it was it was Easter long weekend. So plans got shifted. So I'm here today. Two, I got a job. So I'm starting a new job starting next week, which I'm very excited about. However, it's likely going to carve into some of the time that I would have normally spent in streaming. So I'm going to go back down to one stream a week. I'll let you guys know what that looks like once I get a better idea of what my schedule will be. And we're going to keep doing what we're working on. I will also add in sneaky sort of jump-in streams and off-the-cuff stuff as things start to, sort of settle down. But for the most part, I imagine for the first little bit, possibly the first month, things will start to get a little bit slower for me in terms of my social media and the streaming. That said, we also have PopCon coming up. So as much as I think I'm going to probably dial back on things, there's a pretty big possibility that I'm not going to dial back at all, at least until after PopCon. So I might be double fisting. So who knows what's going to happen that way. Suffice it to say, I am doing my best to kind of stay on top of my social media posting so that everybody stays on top of things. So if anything kind of goes awry, I will let you know right away. As I said in the last stream, I have started a Patreon, and I am very pleased to start to at least get some memberships. If anybody has any questions about that, please, 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 reach out to me, ask questions. There is a free space for people to jump into, which I think would be really awesome. Either way it goes, it just gives an opportunity for me to interface with you and start to kind of build out things together. All of the social stuff that comes up, I love when people interact. We don't get a lot of interaction, and I understand why. It's a little tough to interact with some of this. Please don't hesitate to just throw anything up there. If you have questions, if you're not 100% sure about stuff I've talked about, if there's things you think that I am totally off the mark on, all those things, really happy to kind of be a part of that and to have people be a part of that with me. Any questions that you might have, throw them in the comments. I will address them and answer them as I go. A large amount of this is for me is working through the process with you. Like I said before, watching back and making the edit for the video I posted today, which is a nice sort of connection to this video or this live stream. It allowed me to go back and kind of see things and go, okay, well, this is what I saw. Now I didn't even think about that when I was talking about it, but oh man, I want to use that in this piece. I likened it to game film. So if ever you're able to set up a sort of small camera and you can record yourself doing some of this stuff, and you have no problem with talking through your process, you might want to do it. Honestly, it was kind of enlightening for me, and it helped to put some of this into perspective, which was really cool. The addiction piece is coming along swimmingly. Ironically enough, it's moved entirely away from where we left it in stream, and now it's gone in a different direction. So I'll be kind of showcasing all of those stages as I go on the Patreon, as well as on my Behance in a sort of more thorough fashion of a breakdown. And I'm going to keep on top of this process and doing my best to kind of deep dive into areas that kind of come up. I'm in the works on a video right now where I touch on spatial penetration, utilizing film techniques, specifically the opening sequence from Citizen Kane, and talking about the piece that we worked on tonight and how those two things can connect and how you can use panels to get from point A to point B. Keep your eyes open for that. That's going to be on a members only page from Patreon to start, and then eventually it'll probably make its way over to the YouTube after all of the Patreon members have had their way with it. That and those style of videos and a lot more are coming. Just kind of bear with me. Past that, I encourage everybody to do the thing that I had not done for so long, and that is to take some time every day and do a little bit of art, whether it be some sketching, some videos, if you make music, if you remix music, if you bake, if you cook, if you sugar, if you saute, all of those things, I highly recommend trying at least for a small bit of time for yourself, because if you don't do it, then no one will make art, and then we're just going to be left with nothing but nothing. I have nothing for you guys. Thank you very much for stopping by. I love you very much. I appreciate you coming through. Everybody's awesome, and I will see you in the next one next week. Rock and roll.